Hi, everyone. John Hammondtree here with a special episode of the Reckon Interview Live. I'm speaking today with Bishop William Barber. Bishop, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
You are a co-founder of Repairers of the Breach and a leader of the Poor People's Campaign. Bishop, obviously there is a lot going on in the world these days. Just this past week in Alabama, we've had a number of protests, one of which in Birmingham centered around bringing down a Confederate monument. I have heard from members of our audience, particularly white members, who may not be able to see the connection between the murder of George Floyd by police and monuments to the Confederacy. What do symbols like this represent in terms of the long arc of protest movements in America?
When we see these symbols, one of the things we have to remember is that an overwhelming majority of these monuments were not put up immediately in the aftermath of the Civil War because they would have been illegal. Because most of the legislatures throughout the South were black and white fusion coalition, black people and white people working together to guarantee public education, to guarantee equality for all people, and especially to the former enslaved people. There was a different politic. These monuments were put in place after 1898 up until the 1920s. That was right after Plessy versus Ferguson that said separate but equal in everything. Economics, health, education was legal. These monuments were put up as a sign of wanting to bring back the economic injustice of slavery and bring back the sociological structures of division. So they represented a call for government policies that would be endorsed even with lynching. When these monuments were put up, black men were being hunted on an average of one a day. Cops were killing African Americans for anything, loitering, talking back, looking into their eyes. There was all out role to make sure black people didn't vote. There was an all out move to kick black people out of unions and make sure they didn't have unions, particularly in the South. So these monuments served as a symbol of a coming back, if you will, of a taking back, of an undoing. And one of the last ones, I know that one in Alabama, but one of the last ones that was put up was the one in Charlottesville when Woodrow Wilson was president, who was a racist, who segregated the federal government, who blocked voting rights, who said that the history of the Klan that was portrayed in the movie Birth of a Nation was exactly what the country needed. So when you know that history and you know when these monuments were put up, you understand why people are saying take them down now, because what we need now is to face the wounds and the demons that we haven't faced and undo them in every area of public policy.
Well, and you have had success with the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina and with your work with the Poor People's Campaign in Alabama and elsewhere in the South and around the country of building multiracial coalitions. As I look at the protests that are happening all around the country right now, you know, more so than the protests in the immediate wake of Ferguson, you know, a few years ago, it looks more and more like the coalition of people who are protesting in the streets these days is a multiracial coalition. Is that a sea change that might make a difference? And you talked about it in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. Is it in some ways a return back to those coalitions?
Well, I think it was already happening. And what happens is what we see now with the death of George Floyd was a trigger to the mass outpouring. But I think other things were happening underneath. You know, when George Floyd was killed, remember, we had already been talking about in our campaign 140 million people living in this country, 700 dying every day from poverty, 250,000 dying from poverty. We had been talking about over this country how the same forces, particularly in the South, that passed racist voter suppression laws. Once those forces get elected, they pass laws that actually hurt white people. They are against unions, they're against raising the minimum wage, they're against health care. And in reality, most of those policy positions hurt in raw numbers more white people than black people, but in terms of percentage-wise, more black people. So I think there's a collective mourning going on when we saw this cop put his knee in the name of the state. He represented the state and suffocate this man to death on camera. by it happening in the middle of COVID, where 100,000 people died already. A large percentage of them, overwhelming percentage of Black people, disproportionately, but still the overwhelming in raw numbers is white people. Then we find out 60% of them didn't have to die. They're dying because of the inept leadership of a president who also engages in race baiting and in policy racism. So when he died, and we saw it on camera, it was almost as though when he said, "I can't breathe," many people are saying, "Me either." It was almost as like the state has its knee on the necks of too many people because of the continuing weights of systemic racism and systemic poverty and ecological devastation and this war economy and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. And so what happened is people pour into the street because they're mourning, that there's a public mourning, that there's a cry going out. And I may not know all is wrong, but I know this is not right. I know the state's not supposed to kill you. I know the state is not supposed to keep PPEs from you when you need them. I know the state is not supposed to deny you health care when you need it. I know the state is not supposed to undermine your unemployment. I know the state is not supposed to force low-wage workers go back to work on a Defense Production Act and you not use that same Production Act to protect them. And so people said, we're in the street, we're mourning. But I also think, friend, this public mourning, this protest is actually a sign of hope as well as it is a cry of hurt, because you only protest and mourn what you believe doesn't have to be this way. You only protest what you know is wrong and can be changed. Right. So what is happening is Floyd's death and what it represents, the death of our systems, the breakdown of our systems that should be protecting all of us, has made people join hands. Now, whether it is a moral fusion coalition will be more defined by the changes that come out of it. Right now, we have a moral march, we have moral gathering, the agenda that comes out of it. And I hope and pray that it's not just about policing. Because, for instance, Brother Floyd was a low-wage worker. Brother Floyd lost his job in the midst of COVID. Brother Floyd had COVID and recovered. Right. So he actually represents the kind of moral fusion agenda that we need and the kind of full transformation in our public policy we need, especially in the South.
Well, and even before these mass protests started taking place in the past 2 weeks, your organization was planning a mass assembly. My understanding is it has now been moved primarily online. Will there still be an in-person component?
No, the mass, we had 2 years ago said, and when we did our audit on souls of poor folk and our budget about poor folk, and we started working with poor folk, poor white people in the mountains in Kentucky and Black people from Alabama, that there needed to be a mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington, June 20th, and it was going to be on Pennsylvania Avenue. Our permits were pulled in March, and it would be irresponsible now to call a mass march where people would have to get on planes and trains in the midst of COVID. We can't get that. I think it would be terribly irresponsible anytime to do it now, because we would be spreading the disease and we would be putting people at great risk. But
does that mean that you think the marches now are irresponsible, or?
No, I think no. I said to call one. What's happening now? People are pretty much in their cities.
Got it.
But I'm talking about where you call for it to come from Alaska and Alabama and Massachusetts, and that's what we were doing. Ours was going to be people from everywhere. So our public policy we have public health advisors, and they said you shouldn't do it that way. But we said, but we still need to gather, because what we're doing is an assembly. It's not just a march. And the goal that day, you're not going to hear great long speeches from me and other people pontificating. You're going to hear from poor and impacted people, Black and white people from Alabama, standing with Black and white people from Kentucky, talking about these 5 areas: systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of healthcare, and the war economy, militarization. And they're going to be laying out the policy agenda and the policy demand. Our goal is to change the narrative by changing the narrators, and then to build power. So we're organizing people for a movement who vote. We're registering poor people. We've done a study to find out that if 10 to 15% of the poor and low income people in this country that haven't voted would register and vote, they could fundamentally shift the politics, especially in the South. The margin of victory of any candidate, presidential or Senate, in the South is far can be overcome by organizing poor and low wealth people, like Dr. King told us in 1965 at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, when he said every time poor and low wealth people have the potential to change the political systems, the Bourbon class sows division. I believe that when we see these forces that are for voter suppression in the South, that are against living wages, against health care, they know what Dr. King said is possible right now. It's possible. And that's why I'm hoping even in this moment around the policing that we have a broad agenda that comes out that is transformative. That's what we're pushing for, that sees these issues not as silo issues, but as even but the issue that bad policing hurts Black people, hurts brown people. It undermines the democracy itself and puts everybody at risk. Same is true with voter suppression. Same is true with denying justice to immigrant brothers. So same is true with denying health care. And so our assembly is going to put a face on it and a voice on it. And then we're going to put an agenda out there we're delivering to Congress. And then we're going to be mobilizing people across this country intentionally in poor and low wealth communities.
And you said that is June 20, and
June
people can
20.
join it anywhere online?
Anywhere online. MSNBC is giving us a big platform. Every form of social media that's out there we'll be using. They can go to www.june2020 and tune in at 10 o'clock. There'll be a reshowing on Sunday. And let me just tell you this, to help draw people in, not to speak, but to draw people in, David Oelio, who played King in Selma, will be a part of it. Vice President Gore will be a part of it on the issues around ecological devastation. Jane Fonda, Wanda Sykes, who's a comedian and an activist. Erica Alexander, who played on the Cosbys and Living Single, but who's an activist. And others who are coming, lawyers and people who've been incarcerated. But the voices will be impacted poor and low wealth Black people and white people and brown people and gay people and straight people who have experienced the pain and the death from these 5 interlocking injustices.
One thing that has been very divisive this past week has been, what is the role of the church in this moment? Very famously, President Trump dispersed a peaceful crowd in Washington, D.C. with tear gas and rubber bullets in order to take a photo outside of a church there in Washington, D.C., holding up a Bible. We have heard from church leaders like yourself, who are in many ways leading the charge of the protests themselves. What is the church's role in this moment, and what is the role of pastors to speak out in their individual communities?
Well, I don't think it's a lot of division. I think it's a lot of division and schizophrenia in Trump, and the way he sees the world, and the way he sees democracy, and the way he and his enablers. I don't just put it on him. I think it's his enablers. I think it's his cabinet. I think Senate. I think the folk that haven't called him down. But what he's doing is an old game plan. George Wallace used it. Richard Nixon used it. Bull Connor used it. You fan the flames of racism, and then when people stand up and protest, you identify all of the protesters as being somehow violent, and then you claim that the crown jewel in America is law and order, which is a lie. The crown jewel in America has 5 crown jewels, 6, 7 actually. Establishment of justice, providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, ensuring domestic tranquility, equal protection under the law, and the right to free speech and assembly. Those are the 7 crown jewels. But the old way, you make yourself the arbiter of law and order, the protector, and then you claim you're doing God's will, which what we saw the other day was both a distraction, because he doesn't want people to stay focused on his failure and on his failure with the coronavirus. So he engages in this distraction. He roots in this old strategy of law and order. And it's heretical. It's sinful. It's public idolatry. Now, what I said the other day was, the person, and I could talk about it from the standpoint of religion in general, Judaism, but I want to talk, because I'm talking to you and you're in the South, to the Bible Belt. I'm a son of the Bible Belt. I'm an evangelical. Grew up one. I grew up conservative theology, and by that I don't mean conservative like Republican, where you're against gay people. And I'm talking about you believe in God, you believe in the Bible, you believe. I grew up liberal. I was told you're supposed to share that love and what you believe with everybody. So I believe I'm the perfect one of the examples. I'm not the perfect. There are a lot of people who are mature in our theology that you can be liberal and conservative and all of that. In other words, you're Christian. So from a Christian standpoint, there didn't have to be a debate about where the church should be, because we got this guy that died on the cross and we claim got up on Sunday morning. And he put a lot of stuff down, or at least the people around him wrote down what he said. And he said at his first sermon, he said, here's the role of the church that's being led by the Spirit, not the Episcopal Church, not the Presbyterian, but a church in my spirit. Preach good news to the poor, healing of the brokenhearted, recovery of sight to the blind, release to the captive, and liberty to the oppressed, and welcoming all of those who've been made to feel unacceptable. That's what his first sermon said. Now his last sermon said, when it's all over, your nation's gonna be judged. I don't care if it's America, Russia, China, or Japan. He says every nation's gonna be judged. How? By how you treat the hungry, how you treat the poor and the clothes without clothes, how you treat the sick, how you treat the prisoner, how you treat the stranger, and how you treat the least of these. Now, I would think that if the founder of something at his first sermon was preaching one thing, and his last sermon was preaching the same thing, then there ought not be a division about where we ought to be. We ought to be on asking this society, every policy that's passed, every action that's done, how does it treat the poor? How does it treat the least of these? How does it treat the sick? How does it make sure people are liberated? How can you be against health care when you claim you follow Jesus and everywhere he went, he healed lepers and never charged them a copay? How you do that? So what we have is this schizophrenic attempt to present Christianity in a schizophrenic way, but it comes out of slave religion. That's where the South, it comes out of slave religion, where there was the attempt by the slave master to love Jesus and hold slaves. And you could not, and in that context, you couldn't take seriously the prophetic social justice call of the scriptures, because if you did, it undermined your whole system of slavery. So what did you need? You needed a theology that says it's all right to hold people as slaves. This is God's way. And when the slaves engage in insurrection, you make sure law and order happens. That's where this is coming from. And it's heretical. It is not Christianity. It is a brazen attempt to hijack and turn the faith of Jesus Christ into something it never was intended to be. And the only thing Trump should have done, he shouldn't have run people off. His cabinet shouldn't have run people off. Every one of them should have called and asked that pastor, can we come to church and get on our knees and repent for putting our hand on Bibles and claiming to swear ourselves in office and then violate what that very Bible tells us to do when it comes to how we should act in society. Anything less than that is a form of hypocrisy.
Well, Bishop, thank you so much for your time today. I know you also have a book out in a few days as well.
I was written a couple of years ago. It's coming out. Just happens to be called "We Are Called to Be a Movement," and the essence of it is we are called to be the movement. The broken, if all of the rejected people get together, we can turn this country around. If all of the rejected people have been rejected because of racism, rejected because of poverty, rejected because of denial of health care, rejected because of ecological devastation, stepped on and rejected because of the militarization of our culture, if the folk who've been rejected by this false religious narrative and nationalism and white evangelicalism, all the people who are gay, people who are straight, people who've been pushed down and broke down, if we all get together, and guess what? We are called to be a movement. We're not just called to complain about what has happened to us. We're called to change it.
Well, Bishop, it sounds like people are listening to you, so thank you again.
I hope they're listening to something higher than me, but if I can be a little part of an echo, I'm glad to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless you now.
Bless you.